Okay.
And great, recording and transcription have started. Welcome everybody to week 2 of the Census Data User Workshops sponsored by the states of Oregon and Washington. I'm Charles Reinerson from Population Research Center, and I'm here with Erica Gardner from the Office of Financial Management in Washington, and Barbara LaFleur from the U.S. Census Bureau is running the meeting in terms of the technology. So you're welcome to put questions in the chat, and then we have a small group. So if it's all right with our speaker, would you, Tom, would you prefer to hold questions to the end, or do you want people to raise their hand and ask questions as they go? We only have about probably no more than 10 attendees at this point.
I guess whatever works best with you guys. With a small group, we can do it. We can have questions during. If folks have questions during the presentation.
Okay. So if there's something that you really want to ask at that point, just put your hand up in the chat, and Barbara will unmute you to ask a question. But with
They
that,
can unmute themselves, Charles, when they're called on.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll introduce our speaker for the redistricting data overview. It's Tom Morton, the Assistant Chief of the Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office of the U.S. Census Bureau. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Charles and Erica, for putting this together, and thank you to Barbara LaFleur as well on our end for taking care of the technical aspects and the logistics for the meeting. I'm going to go ahead and present my screen. Just a sec here. All right. Oops. Okay, so I think that you all can see that, right? All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Again, I'm the Assistant Chief of the Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office, and I'm here today to provide an overview of the redistricting data. As Charles mentioned a little bit ago, since we have a small group today, if there are questions that come up while I run through the slides, please feel free to indicate that you have a question, and then Barbara, you and I can talk and address the questions as they come up.
Okay.
So, yep, thank you very much. So before I dig into the redistricting data, I do want to give a little bit of background as well on the census, as well as the 2020 program as a whole, just to sort of lay the framework or the foundation. So, of course, the census is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. It's conducted to determine congressional representation. As you all know, of course, Oregon gained a congressional district with the 2020 apportionment counts when they were released. Also, the data are used to redraw the districts, the congressional and the state legislative districts, and then local governments and county governments use that data as well to, in many states, to redraw districts at the local level. Billions of dollars in federal funds and grants and different types of support, of course, are also provided to tribal, state, and local governments based on the census data. And for the 2020 census, of course, the Census Bureau aims to count every person living in the country once, only once, and in the right place. 67% of households across the nation self-responded, the majority of those via the internet self-response option, and then 32.9% were counted as part of the non-response follow-up operation, or NRFU. Collectively, 99.9% of the households were enumerated during the 2020 census. And then I want to talk a little bit about our standard hierarchy of census geographic entities as well. So you can see on the chart there that there's ovals. They represent the different levels of legal, administrative, and statistical boundaries and how they relate to each other. The redistricting data is tabulated for many, but not all of these boundaries. If you look at the census blocks in the lower center of the chart, those are the smallest components of census geography, and they're aggregated up to form all other levels of geography that you see on the chart here. The lines between each of the ovals represent relationships. Of course, of particular interest for the redistricting data program are voting districts. You can see those are on the left-hand side of the chart, right in between congressional districts and county subdivisions. There's a line connecting census blocks to those that tells us census blocks nest within voting districts, and then a line between voting districts and counties that tells us that voting districts nest within counties, as an example. And so you can see that that plays out for each of the other relationships included on the chart here. And then I do want to talk as well about the differences between apportionment and redistricting data. Of course, the apportionment counts were released in April of this year. That there were population counts at the state level only. No disclosure avoidance was applied because there was no concern, or, you know, at that high of a level, there isn't an issue in terms of disclosing information about some of these individual responses. The apportionment data included resident population totals plus the federally affiliated count overseas. So if there's somebody that's a service member stationed in Germany, let's say, and but their state of residence is Oregon or Washington, they would have been counted in where their state of residence was for the apportionment count. There was no demographic breakdown for that. It was just total population only. When you compare that to redistricting, of course, the redistricting data are provided for many different summary levels and levels of geography. They are provided at the census block level. They're aggregated up to form, voting districts, census tracts, county geography, of course, and then all the way up to state level geography. Only the resident population is reported for redistricting. So in the example I described about someone being stationed overseas, they would not be counted in the redistricting counts. However, if they were, one point of clarification, if they were stationed in the United States but deployed overseas, they would be counted in the resident population. So that's a point of clarification there. As far as the data that are included with the redistricting release, there's race data, ethnicity data, there's data on population and group quarters, as well as data on housing units. And differential privacy is applied to the redistricting data, or almost all of the variables. There are a few exceptions to that, which I'll get into later. But they're applied via the top-down algorithm, which I'll talk a little bit about later as well. And then, of course, as you're all aware, the redistricting data were released over a couple of months. There was the legacy format release in August, and then we mailed DVDs and USBs featuring the data with easier-to-use data extraction tools to official state recipients. And then we released the data on data.census.gov in September. And as you're all, I'm sure, familiar with on the agenda, Kaneen Reese who works on data.census.gov will be demoing the site and how to access redistricting data on the site later today. So that should be a fun presentation to look forward to. All right, let's go ahead and dig into the program itself. Of course, our program functions under the specifications of Public Law 94-171. This was passed by Congress in 1975. And so our program, in order to adhere to that law, we provide states the opportunity to identify the different geographic areas or levels of geography for which they need to receive population tabulations for the purposes of legislative redistricting. Some of the different geographic areas for which we work with and updates are made and data are tabulated for include the tabulation blocks and the voting districts, which are also referred to as precincts or wards, as well as the state legislative and congressional districts. And very importantly, when the program was established, we reached out to the state legislative majority and minority leadership in each state, DC and Puerto Rico, and we request that they designate someone that could serve in a nonpartisan manner as a primary point of contact between the state and the Census Bureau for the duration of the redistricting program. So also of importance, of course, is that our goal is to make sure that we deliver the tabulations to the official recipients, including the governor and the legislative majority and minority leadership by no later than 1 year from Census Day. And of course, that data needs to be high quality and fit for use. This cycle was an exception due to the delays caused by COVID, as well as prioritizing the production and release of the apportionment data. We, of course, released the redistricting data later than 1 year from Census Day. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. So if you look at this slide, the program was established in July of 2014. There are 5 phases in the 2020 program. The first phase was the Block Boundary Suggestion Project, or BBSP. This was conducted over 2 cycles from 2015 to 2017. During that time, states had the opportunity to suggest linear features and edges as holds or do not holds to inform the 2020 block inventory. Also then, moving on into 2018, we started the Voting District Project. That was conducted over 3 cycles. So we collected updates, county-based voting district plans for each of the states. And then phase 3 is the data delivery, which we just completed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the coming slides as well. And then phase 4 is where we'll actually collect the redistricting plans. I know that states are already busy conducting their congressional and legislative redistricting. And so we will reach out to the states at the end of this year into early next year to request that they provide the new state legislative district plans, as well as the 118th congressional district plans. We'll collect those as well. Phase 5 is then the evaluation of the 2020 RDP. We've already started phase 5. In July, we were at a national conference of state legislatures meeting, and we held a session to collect feedback on the first 2 phases, for where we received the geographic updates. And then we will conduct another session on those phases, as well as phase 3 at an upcoming legislative summit in Tampa in November. So, and we'll continue to hold evaluation sessions, and we're going to take all the lessons learned, best practices, and recommendations from the states on the 2020 program to inform the design for the 2030 program. And we'll release a document at the end of calendar 24 called A View from the States, where we'll provide that design. So just to talk a little bit about participation in the first 2 phases, a total of 41 states, including DC and Puerto Rico, in that total, like for the percentage, participated in phase 1. We received updates from 1,413 counties, which is roughly 44% of the counties in the nation. And then for phase 2, 49 of 52 states and equivalents participated in 1 or more cycles, and we received updates for 3,099 counties, which is just over 96% of all counties. And I realized that Oregon did not participate in this, but that's because, of course, Oregon, as well as California and Hawaii, don't use voting districts in the way that the other states do. So we understand that as well. All right, let's talk about phase 3. Of course, at the beginning of this year, we delivered the geographic support products to the states. We also posted them on our website. the goal was we wanted to provide these products to the states to help the states prepare for the receipt of the tabulation data. At the time that we delivered these products, we were still working on the deadline for the releases of the release of the tabulation data. We included shapefiles, reference maps. In fact, there are 4 types of reference maps included. 3 of them are county-based. Those include the block maps, the census tract maps, and the school district maps. And then 1 set of maps was state legislative district-based and included voting districts as well. And then we also provided block assignment files with name lookup tables that identify all of the blocks and the corresponding geographic entities associated with them, as well as the names associated with those geographic entity codes. And then we also provided block-to-block relationship files, which crosswalk the 2010 to 2020 blocks. As I'm sure many of you know, although sometimes the block boundaries themselves stay the same if they're bounded especially by visible features or other geographies, the block numbers do change from decade to decade. So the part of the recommendations we received back from the 2010 program was to include this file in the Geographic Support Products Suite. So it is included now. Just a little bit more about the geographic products we provided. Hi, is there a question? Okay. Sorry about that. I thought I heard somebody asking something. Okay, I'll continue. So we provided the state-based shapefiles as well as the county-based shapefiles, both from 2010 for reference as well as 2020 for many different levels of geography. There is some duplication in there. The reason for that was we wanted to provide county-based shapefiles so that folks in local government would be able to access the data for their counties without having to extract it from the state-based files. We also included a topological faces file, which featured a record and all of the geocodes associated with each record or polygon. And then here's a couple of examples of the other files I mentioned. On the left-hand side is a county-based block reference map. It's hard to see here, but when we think of traditional census blocks, we think of city blocks, so they're bounded by 4 visible features. And so this was a good example of kind of what that looks like. You can't see it on the screenshot, but there's a 4-digit code within each of those city blocks, which represents, of course, the 4-digit block code. And then on the right-hand side on the lower right is the block assignment file sample. Here, the block assignment files were created for 10 different geographies. This is the block assignment file for county subdivisions. And so the file shows each block within the state and then the corresponding county subdivision if there is a corresponding county subdivision. And then that can be correlated with the name lookup table, which shows that the code 59,000 represents the city of Providence. Okay, moving on now to the tabulation product, which I'm sure many of the data users on the call have been working with a lot over the past couple of months. The thing I want to point out on this slide is that the first 5 tables here listed were the same tables that include the same variables from 2010. So P1 through P4 and H1. And then table P5 is group quarters population by major group quarters type. And as Erica mentioned at the top of the meeting, this is the first time the state of Washington did reallocations, in fact, of prison populations for the purposes of redistricting. In fact, this is one of the reasons why we, of course, included this table this time around, so that states with the state mandates to reallocate group quarters populations can use this data to assist with that process. And I'll get into more details of each of these tables on the coming slides. So tables P1 and P3, you can see all of the variables and race iterations included for these 2 tables on the right-hand side. There's a total of 63 different race iterations. There's population of 1 race and the 6 classifications there. as well as 2 or more races, and each combination of classifications. And then if you look at the very bottom right, you can see that folks that there's also an option for folks that identify as part of all 6 races. So table P1, the universe is total population, and then for table P3, it's the total voting age population. So that's the difference between those 2 tables, but all of the fields within those 2 are the same fields. Okay, same with tables P2 and P4 in terms of these 2 tables having all the same fields. The difference from the other 2 tables I just showed you is that these tables include Hispanic or Latino and count of the Hispanic or Latino count. And then for not Hispanic or Latino, there's a count for each of the 63 race iterations again. So the total universe for table P2 is total population. The total universe for table P4 is total population 18 years and over. And you know, the best way, of course, to get the under 18 population is just to subtract the voting age population from the total population. Table H1 is the only housing table included in the redistricting data. The universe is total housing units, and then a breakdown of those that are occupied and vacant. And then table P5 is the group quarters population by major group quarters type table. This includes a universe with total population and group quarters. There is no demographic breakdown included with this table, but there are, of course, breakdowns of different types of group quarters. So there are institutionalized population totals, those for correctional facilities, as well as nursing facilities. And then there's non-institutionalized populations, such as those for colleges or universities, student housing, and military quarters, to name a few. Other types of group quarters that are not specifically listed here fall into the other category, depending if they are considered institutional or non-institutional facilities. All right, and now I want to talk about the different products that were the different deliveries and the different products that were delivered or released to accompany those. Of course, in August, we released the redistricting data summary files in the legacy format to the states and the public. We also provided support products to help data users who may not have familiarity with how to use the legacy format so that they could access data quickly. I do want to cover the legacy format here because it is still the best way to access everything in one data set. So if you need to be able to access the tabulations for all different summary levels for which the data are provided at once, you can do that using the legacy format. So of course, before the August 12th release, the legacy format data were reviewed and cleared. They were always a part of the 2020 product plan. We had intended to release them at the same time that the data was delivered to the states on removable media, as well as released on data.census.gov. The format has been released going back to at least the 2000 census. And it is true, as I mentioned, that this data set does require additional handling. But again, it's the entire data set. So that's the advantage that you have with it. It is the exact same data set that was released with the easier to use data tools in September. The only difference was the format. And in addition to that, of course, we have technical documentation that explains the geographic concepts. Is there a question, Barbara?
I don't think there's a question. I think someone's not muted. If you could please mute your green.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll continue here. Of course, on our website too, we have a header file, so you can easily, folks have used that to easily be able to see the definitions of each of the fields included in the redistricting data. There's a Microsoft Access database shell, along with an instructional guide and video tutorial that shows example queries on how to work with the data. And then for those folks that are familiar with SAS and R programming, there are scripts in there on the website as well that for importing the legacy format files. And then I'll try to go over this quickly since I know that you know, we've had releases since the legacy format, but there's a total of 4 relational files, a geoheader, and 3 data segments included with the legacy data. They all have the same delimiter, which is helpful. Back in 2010, there were different delimiters for the geoheader and the data segments, so that's something I wanted to point out. In August, we also released the Quick Facts application, and so this allows for folks to view population counts for 8 different levels of geography. I hear a little bit of feedback on there. If folks can mute your phones or your computers, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so this particular screenshot, we have the state population counts for Oregon and Washington, as well as county counts, and then a couple of city counts. So folks can compare up to 6 geographic entities at a time. We also released the demographic data map viewer. And so there's data available in the map viewer for states, counties, and census tracts. And you can see the different tabs across the screenshot here. There's population, race alone or in combination data. There's Hispanic origin data, of course. On this particular image here, we've got a census tract in Yakima County, Washington, and we're showing the % of that tract that identifies as Hispanic or Latino. So that is a helpful tool. The geographies are scale dependent, so as you zoom in to a larger scale, of course, you see the more disaggregate levels of geography in there. We also have data visualizations. This visualization is particularly helpful because it allows folks to see the percentage of the population that's 18 and older, as well as the % that's under 18. And of course, since we don't have other age breakdowns here, just the cutoff, you know, of voting age, it's helpful to be able to see at least the under 18 counts represented as well. So here in the state of Oregon, you can see here the % of population age 18 and older by county, and the change from 2010 to 2020. So of course, the dark purple is a change of 10% or more increase, and then there's also a decrease in just one county in the state. But you know, in addition to that, there's a lot of facts that are available for states and counties included in the visualization. So here you can see, like in Lane County, Oregon, what the population changes for the population that's 18 and over versus under 18 from 2020 to 2010 as examples. So even though the total population increased, you can see that the under age 18 population actually decreased by 195 people. Just as an example there. And similarly for Washington, of course, I'm just throwing this up here as well so that you can see what that visualization looks like for Washington. And you can see the majority of the counties saw an increase of % of population that's 18 and older. If you look at Pierce County, Washington, you know, interestingly, the under age 18 population here increased by 13,637 compared to 2010. And so, you know, it's just a nice visualization. And I know that I think, Charles, you mentioned, and I've seen the link too as well, that within your states that you've created visualizations as well, which I'm sure are very helpful for the data users. We also have some visualizations on diversity index by state, as well as the race and ethnicity data for the different classifications of race. And again, those can be drilled down to the county level as well. All right, and then we also have redistricting data program state profiles, and we release those towards the end of August. So they provide specific information and visualizations for the state. So you can go to our library website and be able to access those as well. And then I want to talk a little bit about the September deliveries. Of course, on September 15th, our office mailed the redistricting data on removable media, which included both DVDs and flash drives, with this browsing software that made a data extraction much easier to do or conduct. And we sent that to the official state recipients. So that included the state governors, the majority and minority legislative leadership, the redistricting commissions in the 16 states, including Washington, where they're established, as well as the nonpartisan state liaisons. And then the goal was to have that data delivered by September 16th, which is the same day we released the data on data.census.gov. At that same time, we also made the API available to the public as well. A couple of quick slides here about the September release. So this slide shows some of the different windows included in the removable media that was sent to the official state recipients. So on the upper right-hand side is the launch window. That's what they would get when they first load the CD. And the software is self-extractable. There's nothing that needed to be installed on folks' computers. They could just open up the launch window. And then when they access the data set, on the left-hand side is the select geography window. And in there are all the different summary levels for which the data are provided. If there's a particular summary level that doesn't exist in that state, then they would get that message. Obviously, there's no Puerto Rico data in Oregon or in Washington. So, but then folks could drill down and select the geographic area of interest. There's also the ability within here to perform large pseudo-geography extracts. So the states could download like all blocks in county, data for all blocks in county, all voting districts within state, those types of downloads. And then on the right-hand side is sort of the resulting data preview window where folks could view the data and they can extract reports and those types of things. So this software, we've used a similar format of this software in previous releases, and so we found that the states find this very helpful in terms of being able to work with the data. And then, of course, I won't talk too much about data.census.gov because Kaneen will be presenting on it later this afternoon or later this morning for you guys. But this is our primary data dissemination tool. This is where the data redistricting data were released on September 16th. Within the tool, users can create their own custom filters. They can filter by different data sets, like obviously like the redistricting data. They can filter by different years and different summary levels or levels of geography. And then there's a functionality within the tool as well to be able to map the data, to view the data, and then to download the data as well. And there are a lot of different downloads for pseudo geographies in there as well. So you think all voting districts within state, all tracts within state, all blocks within county, those types of downloads. And then I did mention this a little bit ago, but I just want to reiterate because I know there was a lot of confusion. This is a very unique cycle in terms of the release of the data. And so the August and September deliveries are identical. The only difference is really the format and the tools that we developed to make the data easier to work with for September. But other than that, they're exactly identical. The Census Bureau considers both releases to be official and fit for use. So, some states have statutes that say they need to. work with the data at certain times, or you know, like I'm getting feedback again. I'm sorry.
Can people mute?
All right.
See,
I think I'm good now. So by the way, there's a few URLs in the presentation, so I can share that with Barbara and she can send that to the group. At the bottom of this slide here, you can see a link to our FAQs page. So there's other FAQs available for folks related to the redistricting data on there. And then, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I talked a little bit about the top-down algorithm and how it's applied to almost all of the variables included with the redistricting data. The three exceptions are listed on this slide here. The first is that the total resident population at the state level, of course, is held invariant. In other words, we reported the count exactly as it was collected. The second one is the number and type of occupied group quarters facilities. At the block level, that data was held invariant, as well as the total number of housing units at the block level. Now, speaking of blocks, in all of the other data variables for which, that we produced and released, the top-down algorithm was applied to all other block level data, with the exceptions of group quarters, total group quarters, facilities, or occupied, and then the total number of housing units. And so many of you have probably heard about this, and while you've been looking at the block data, you've seen it yourself. But sometimes the block level data will seem like it may not be correct. This is because, of course, through the top-down algorithm, noise is injected. It's injected at the greatest level, at the block level, because that's the smallest level or most disaggregate level of geography. And it's injected at in lower amounts as you work your way up through the different levels of geography. So there might be some implausible results at the block level. There may be cases where there's a population that's under the age of 18, like all of the total population in that block, like everybody's under 18, that could happen. There's also a chance that the average household size within the block might seem off. Maybe it could be like 10 or 15 or something, when you'd expect it to be more like, I don't know, 5 or whatever. I'm just kind of guessing there. So there are some chances that there could be some implausible results. But the key thing is that as you aggregate blocks up to form the larger set geographies, such as block groups, tracts, voting districts, counties, that type of stuff, or if you aggregate blocks up to make like neighborhood level geography, as you aggregate the block data up to higher levels, you're going to see that the data are much more accurate, and the noise is going to be less noticeable. So that's why it's so important to try to aggregate block level data up to a higher level. Also, the counts are consistent within the tables, across the tables, and across the geographies. So even though the housing unit count, for example, is invariant, and if it's occupied or it's not occupied, it's not invariant, the total occupied and not occupied counts will still add up to the total number of housing units within a set of geography, right? So, and similarly, if you aggregate up the populations of the census tracts to the county level, since tracts nest within county, you will get the same counts that you would get for the county as a whole, if that makes sense. So those are some key things that I want to point out. In addition to that, when we released the redistricting data, we also released the 2010 census data in a demonstration format with the 2020 census protection settings. And the idea there is that folks can take the 2010 data that was originally released 10 years ago and compare it to the demonstration data to get an idea of how, you know, the 2010 format or release compares to the 2020 release, if that makes sense. So the name of that file is the privacy protected microdata file. Also, we have detailed summary metrics that have been released. They've been processed by the IPUMS folks as well. And also there's also the American Statistical Association, or AMSTAT, has conducted their own independent research on this process as well. And we've got additional information and resources on our website, and there's a URL for that here. And then if you're not familiar, I encourage you to go to our website, which is census.gov/RDO. That's our landing page. And on the website, there is, let's talk about the bottom one here. There's an accordion menu that includes all of the different data tools and visualizations I've talked about today, as well as, you know, links to data.census.gov and the blog posts and press releases as well surrounding redistricting. And then to access the data in the legacy format, as well as those support materials I talked about, so like the technical documentation and the Microsoft Access shells, that type of stuff. You can access that by going to the Redistricting Data Summary Files link on our page. And also, real quick, just want to say that thank you for your time. And again, our website is census.gov/RDO. And then we've got our email and phone contact information here as well. And with that, I think that I'm happy to take any questions.
Looks like Paul has a question for you. Paul, you can unmute.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Given the noise injected into the block level population,
Yes.
should we, if we want to redistrict county level commissioner districts, for example, or port districts, should we not use the block level data when rebalancing or redistricting and instead aggregate them into block groups?
You know, really the best way I can answer that is obviously, you know, it's really how you guys see fit. But you know, if the districts, I mean, the larger they are, you know, if they are similar size to block group or tracts, or, you know, in terms of population or whatever, you could do that. But if you want to be able to have control, you know, more control over the boundaries, I would still think that it would be okay to use block.
Yeah.
You know, the reason that we include, of course, data for blocks is because that's a level of geography that the states have identified as being needed, you know, in terms of redrawing their legislative and congressional districts. So if it's a county commissioner district, I would think that, you know, blocks would be a good geography to do that with. Yeah, I understand, like an individual block is not going to produce probably the quality of the data that you want, but as you aggregate it up, you know, to higher levels, it should be very accurate. So
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, we have a question in chat. It's from Wei Yen. Is there any research on whether the online classes during the pandemic in 2020 had any impact on how college students were counted, particularly for small college towns like Pullman, Washington, or Moscow, Idaho?
Yeah, that's a great question. So back in June of 2020, the Census Bureau, you know, in recognition of the fact that a lot of college students weren't living on campus or even at their off-campus addresses close to the university around April 1st, the Census Bureau made a concerted effort to reach out to the university presidents and administrations to collect basic information about all of the on-campus and off-campus students, including their names, their full names, date of birth, and their local addresses, as well as alternative addresses. So the idea there is that we have a lot of unduplication capabilities. So if folks were, so if someone's going to lives close to the university in Pullman, Washington, but they're, I don't know, they're from Salt Lake City or something. And if we had the local address as well as the alternate address, and obviously we know they're a college student, we would be able to unduplicate, let's say if they filled out the census or were reported at the Salt Lake City address, as opposed to the Pullman, Washington address, right? So we made a concerted effort to be able to collect that type of information with the goal of making sure that we could count those college students where they would have been on April 1st or Census Day.
And I'll just add, from the evaluation perspective, there were varying degrees of success with that. Pullman maybe not so bad, but Central was very much undercounted.
Okay, well, in that case, the next presentation will be very useful because, of course, there is an opportunity coming up, the Count Question Resolution program to appeal those types of situations. So I know that Matt Freites will be discussing that a little bit with the folks.
So next question from Carol Nato. Apologies if this was addressed earlier, but at the state level, are the redistricting data controlled to the apportionment counts?
At the state level, let me go back to the slide here. So at the state level, these counts are they're slightly different, right? So
Can people mute their computers or phones?
Yeah, so thank you. So the apportionment data included the federally affiliated count overseas. So in the example that a service member is from Salem, Oregon, or Tacoma, Washington, but they're stationed overseas, we have information, the information about the state of residence, right? And so, so they are counted as part of the federally affiliated count overseas. So there's the resident population of Oregon and Washington, and then there's the federally affiliated count overseas population. So that federally affiliated count overseas, or FACO count, is added to the resident population count for the purposes of apportionment. Whereas for redistricting, it's just the resident population only.
So next question, can you make the scales adjustable on your visualization tools?
The scales.
So what I was referring to is like the range of options, so it doesn't look so, like if you pick a category, it's either one or the other. If you could narrow the range of options in the visualization tool. For example, if you're looking at a county data, you want to look at tracks, if they're very close together, they're either one color or the other, as opposed to being able to show like more differentiation. Does that make sense?
I see. Yeah, that's a good question. The functionality is pretty limited in those data vises. So in terms of changing the symbology and the ranges or whatever, there is no way to do that within the tools themselves. But if you're a GIS user, you could probably easily reproduce this, or if you know somebody that can, and then you'd have a lot more control over that.
Do we have any additional questions? If we don't, I have an addition. Oh, Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought I would mention that sorry to everybody who couldn't get in with the link that they used last week. There appeared to be a different link for this week, but I wanted to let you know that I checked the next 2 sessions on count question resolution and data.census.gov, and those links are identical to the one that you got into this meeting with, since you're here listening to me talk right now. So I'm sorry again about that, and that the link should work for the next 2 meetings today. Thanks.
And Erica, there is one more question in chat.
I see that. So we have on the block level, did disclosure avoidance inject noise into the group quarter population counts?
The block, oh, let me see here. Okay. The total population count, I'm going to need to follow up with the clarification on that. My understanding is that it's definitely the number of group quarters facilities. That was held invariant, but the actual counts themselves, I'm going to have to follow up and confirm. Philip?
Disclosure avoidance was injected to group quarters. So it's the number of group quarters is invariant, but the count within the group quarters is not. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you again. Back to disclosure avoidance on the block level. Can you give me a percentage range of how far off the total count could be for each block? Is it maybe 5%, 10% off?
I can ask our disclosure avoidance subject matter experts, but no, I can't specifically give you that range.
Okay. Yeah. Following up with that would be great, because I'll need to be explaining this to other folks, and something basic like that would be great.
Okay. What I can do is I can work with Barbara LaFleur to get that information out to Erica and Charles. Thank you, Paul.
Bill, you have a question? Go ahead. You're muted, so can you unmute yourself?
I'm sorry. No, I didn't have a question. I was just having a hard time getting in and out here. Sorry about that.
Okay. So are there any other questions? Let me just check. So I had a question, or more of a clarification. I know that early on you mentioned some of the differences in how military population was counted between 2010 and 2020. And I know that that's a question we often get. Can you review that difference?
Yeah, one of the best ways, I think, to understand how the populations were counted are the difference between the use of the word stationed and deployed. Folks that are stationed, service members that are stationed in the United States but deployed overseas, they are still counted in the resident population, right? But if folks are actually stationed overseas, that's when they're only counted in the FACO count that's included with the apportionment count.
And that was a difference between 2020 and 2010. So in 2010, that population was counted overseas. Is that correct?
In 2010, the count overseas was included in the resident population count, I believe. There's no difference for apportionment. The difference is with the redistricting data.
One last call. Does anyone have any questions? So I know there were a bunch of people who came on mid-presentation. We do have a recording of this presentation, and sometime in the next week or so, both Charles and I will be sharing or posting that presentation or recording, and be able to share that for those who missed the first part. Charles, do you have anything that you would like to add?
No, that's it. We thank Tom very much for the information, and we'll at 10:30, is that correct? 10:30 we'll be reconvening with count question resolution, not revolution.
Yes.
Thanks, you guys.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes.